So, as you can see in the slide, our subject of study today is Vedic age. It spans from 1500 BC all the way up till 6000 BC. Okay, the early Vedic age spans from 1500 to 1000. Later Vedic spans from 1000 to 600. So we will first study the early Vedic and then we will move on to the later Vedic. But before we move on, let me just give you a very brief idea about the early and later Vedic. So when we talk about early Vedic, their primary focus was on cattle, okay, not agriculture. But in the later Vedic, the focus was on agriculture. And in the early Vedic, it was a amalgamation of small kingdoms. But later Vedic, it turned into larger kingdoms, which eventually in the 600 BC, we will see another topic, rise of Mahajanapatas, rise of kingdoms. These semi-large kingdoms turned into large kingdoms with proper standard army. But in the early Vedic and then the later Vedic period, there were only tribal lords, okay? And then there was a chief who would muster up the villagers, who would have conversations with the village elders, and they would muster up the armies and they would go in battle. And once the battle was done, everyone goes back to their home. There was no proper standing army in the early and later Vedic period. So you can have an idea about the early Vedic and the later Vedic through their political structure with no standing army. And every time there's a war, early Vedic, it was a war about cattle, okay? To own cattle. Alag jaga de jai na mondaki karne jai, wealth karne jai, sona karne jai. But with the early Vedic time, they do cattle karne jai. Kuru khan, saguli khan na utuan. The measurement of wealth was cattle during the time, okay? But later on, Mahajanapatas time, the proper standing army, territorial kingdom, and so forth, okay? So Vedic age, early Vedic period. This is the timeline. We studied about Harappa civilization, then from 2600 to 1900, then the decline of major urban centers, decline of economic and administrative system, these two between 1900 to 1500. Then we will study, today we are going to study 1500 BC, the Vedic period, 1500 all the way up till 600 BC, okay? So around this period, the speakers of Indo-Aryan language, Sanskrit, entered northwest India from Indo-Iranian region. When we say northwest, some of you might know, but for those of you who don't know, supposing this is India map, okay? This is India map, and then we have the north, we have the south, we have the west, we have the east, okay? From your position, this is west, this is east. So northwest meaning between the north and the west. Utu area of Punjab, Haryana, all that, right? And so Utu Bishida, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and I war. So they came all the way from the Indo-Iranian region, all the way up to India, in the northwest side of India, and they spoke the Indo-Aryan language, Sanskrit, okay? Now, before we begin with the early Vedic period, this is very important about Hinduism, the origin of Hinduism. Nobody knows how Hinduism originated. Does anyone know why the term Hindu, or who introduced the term Hindu? The very interesting thing is that Hindu was introduced by the Britishers, okay? Very interesting, right? We actually thought that this was the term that was created by the Hindus, but no, it wasn't created by the Hindus. We look at the pre-Vedic roots. What are some of the examples that we can extract about Hinduism? We have the people tree symbolism. We saw it yesterday, the people tree. And we have the female figurines, the bronze statue, bronze dancing girl, which was created using the lost wax technique. We also have the seals, the ritual imageries. Okay, so this could be a possible early tradition of the Hindus. And then comes the Vedic age. In the Vedic age, the Rig Veda and the other Vedas were created. Fire sacrifice was introduced, which was known as Yashta. The gods such as Indra, Agni, Soma, Varun, which is still followed in the present times. And we also have the priestly ritual tradition. Okay, so Vedic age also has some specifics of the Hindu religion. We also have the Upanishad shift, which was a philosophical shift of the Hinduism that we know today. Atman, Brahman, self, the innermost self. In the Vedic age, people started sacrificing, right, making sacrifices. But in the Upanishadic period, they started asking, why are we sacrificing? What is the purpose of life? What is the universe made of? All these philosophical questions. And then came the classical Hindu synthesis from 500 BC onwards. Many traditions gradually converged. The different traditions with little bits of Hinduism, all this merged, converged, and they interacted. Okay, and then came the epic traditions, Ramayana and Mahabharata, the Puranic traditions, the growth of Vaishnavism, Shaivism, and Shaktism. Okay, Vishnu, Vaishnavism, Shiva, and then Shakti. So Bhakti and regional traditions is also another tradition we will be learning about later. So it's an evolution from one period to another. And when the Britishers came, they looked at the religion of India and they could not find one common religion. Everyone had different religions. Everyone worshipped. Some people worship Shakti, some people worship Vishnu, some people worship Shiva, Varun, Soma, Agni, a lot of gods. People often say that the Hindus have millions of gods, right? So they gave them one common term. Because they had a lot of similarities, they gave them one common term in order for them to categorize it conveniently. They gave them the term Hindu. Okay, so that's how Hinduism came about. I hope everything is clear. It's not an official religion. Okay, it was a term given by the British which came to be adopted later on, which were adopted and people started accepting that it's a Hindu religion. It also creates unity among the Hindus. So from a political perspective, it is advantageous for it was advantageous for our early national leaders to use the term Hindu to try to unite the people. They could have removed it and said that there's diversity in our religion, but they brought every similar, religion into one religion and they called it Hindu. Okay, so that's it. Just a brief background before we start with the Vedic age to help you understand the overall landscape of the Hindu religion. Now let's officially start with the Vedic period, 1500 to 600 BC. 1500 to 1000 is the early Vedic period, and 1000 to 600 is the later Vedic period. Okay, so if you look at the early Vedic period, two basic features that you can start off with is it was a cattle-based society. People fought for cattle. Okay, and they focused not on agriculture, they focused on rearing cattle. Sakli kan paluwo, guru kan paluwo, inigala danla society da thagiche. It was a tribal organization. Okay, organization of tribes. Different tribes, nijo la postidi thakala time thagiche. And then we also have the Sabha and Samiti, which I will explain to you later. Sabha being a group of elders, and then Samiti meaning an assembly of folks of the village. And agriculture. And in the later Vedic period, the cattle-based society eventually transformed into agriculture. People started focusing more on agriculture, on plantation, and the kingdoms were larger. And they also introduced the Varna system. Okay, Brahmana, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Shudras. And there are evidences, because it's written in Rig Veda. So why was the four Varna system introduced in the later Vedic period and not the early Vedic period? Okay, so this is one anomaly, and I like to clarify that as well. In the early Vedic period, we did not have the fourfold Varna system. The Brahmana, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Shudras. Okay, the fourfold Varna system, I'm sure almost all of you must have heard about it. So, Brahmana, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, these three were present in the early Vedic period, but it was occupational based, not based on birth. So the actual fourfold Varna system that we know today started in the later Vedic period. But the early Vedic period also had Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas. Vaishyas, the term they used was vis, V-I-S, and it meant the common people. Okay, and the Brahmanas, the priests, okay, and the royal people, and then Kshatriyas, the soldiers, and then vis, the common people. That was the only categorization, and that was the only classification based on occupation, simply based on occupation, not based on your birth. Okay, but then they introduced the Shudras, right, the lowest class of the society in the later Vedic period. So officially the fourfold Varna system started in the later Vedic period, not the early Vedic period. Okay, that's one important clarification. Now, this is the early Vedic settlement. Like I said, the people, the Indo-Aryans, they came to northwest. See that I've circled it? I've circled it, the Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan region. They came to this place from the northwest, from the Indo-Iranian region. Okay, they came all the way to India, in this area of India. And if you look at it, this map, this side of the map is this, okay? This side of the map is this. So we can look at Rajasthan, Haryana, which is the same as Rajasthan and Haryana here. So if you look at it, so the boundary is somewhere around here, okay? So which means the South Sindhu, the 7 places where they initially settled, comprise of areas beyond the India that we know today. Kumba do Pakistan la area de bi ase, Pakistan la area de bi ase, kumba do India la area de bi ase. So you see that it's a combination of India and Pakistan. In a lot of history that you read, okay, we talk about Indian subcontinent. It consists of territories of the present day Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India mainly. Okay, so we must understand that. So they came to India from the northwest part of India, and they settled in this area. Okay, they settled in this area, which includes the Pakistan as well as India. So I hope it's clear. Yeah. So it did not exist. Okay, the Indus, the early Vedic settlement, it did not exist in this part of India. Just this part, the northwest part of India. So we're studying about the northwest part of India. Later on, we will deal with South India. Later on, we will deal with the Bengal and so forth. But okay, another very important distinction. Now, the early Vedic period, they settled here, right? And you will find in a lot of books that the later Vedic period, they went from the Sub-Sindhu region, to the Indo-Gangetic plains, okay, which comprises of, the present-day West Bengal, Bihar, Uti area, we will learn about that later. From here, they move all the way till here. They settled. It was more fertile. It was more advantageous for cultivation, which is why the focus was agriculture. Excuse me. Right, the focus was agriculture, later Vedic period. So they moved to more fertile plains later on in the later Vedic period. Now, we will talk about the features of the early Vedic period. Okay, so the first is every society there is a family, and family, collection of families is village, and village before the clan thake mondi, the Aus and the Lothas, the Sumis, everyone has their own respective clans in the village. So clan is based on apnila title, mondo. So Udunishna Dandi clan bit thake, they call it Vis. Okay, it was formed by a group of villages. Now, Kula family was called Kula. I will not define too much. Mathabikawo. The family life was patriarchal, which means the man was the head of the family, and that's it about the family, the Kula, and then the village Grama. Okay, village was known as Grama, clan was known as Vis, and Jana was known as tribe. So clan, when we talk about clan, it's formed by a group of villages. Okay, posti bitore clan alag thake na, but then with the same clan to alag posti dibi mon bi thake do. Na, for example, the Aus they have Pongan. One village will have Pongan, the other village will also have Pongan or Lomgumar, right? Itu Nishnai group of villages from the clan, and so this is the social unit of the early Vedic period. It's very simple. These 4 terms, memorize it, and you are good to go. Okay, Jana means tribe. Later on, you will learn that Jana Patah meaning territory to be Iwo, but for now, Jana tribe. Okay, so Kula, Grama, Vis, and Jana. Family, village, clan, and tribe. Very easy to memorize, right? Kula, Grama, Vis, Jana, Kula, Grama, Vis, Jana, Kula, Grama, Vis, Jana, Kula, Grama, Vis, Jana, Kula, family, Grama, village, Vis, clan, Jana means tribe. Very easy to memorize, okay? You memorize it this way. Now, these people, okay, Kula, Grama, Vis, Jana, who ruled these people? The Rajan, okay, tribal chief or the king was known as the Rajan. Remember, he is not the kind of monarchical king that we know now today. He is the tribal chief. Okay, he is the tribal chief, Rajan. So, what are the functions of the Rajan? Before we start off with the functions, let's talk about how the Rajan was chosen. Okay, how the Rajan was chosen. Important exam point. The early Vedic king's position was not fully hereditary. Hereditary means jani do na. King ase pachabi king hobo, utula pachala pachabi king hobo na. It was not fully hereditary in the later absolute modern sense. His authority depended considerably on the support of the tribal community and assemblies. Now, what a tribal community? The samiti, okay? And the assemblies is a sabha, a group of elders. Moala village council gan gambura khan thake na utunishna tahan ba bish tahan la opor de bishi hui jese udo rajan do choose kuru bole in the early Vedic period. Okay, so from the tribal community, this sabha will be chosen, samiti will be chosen. Samiti do, and if I were to give you a present day example, samiti is a group of folk assembly, right, that influences the election of rajan. So you can say that samiti is a group of people that are above 18 years of age. And then tribal community would include the children, people who influence every member of the village who is able to influence the election of the Rajan. Folk assembly do samiti koide. And then sabado, a group of elders in a village. So utu tuita la combination ba Rajan do choose kore. But in the later Vedic period, we will find that sabha or samiti la influence chai jise. It became hereditary. Okay, the king's position became hereditary. King la pachala pacha. Inya beshi kara hui jise. We will talk about the different ritualistic practices that the king conducted, Ashwamedha, Vajapaya, Rajasuya. We will talk about all that later Vedic period there. But here, the king was under the influence of the sabha and the samiti. I hope this clarification is good enough. Now we talk about Rajan's function. Okay, he led the tribe in warfare. War Tagadamde, remember, he does not have a standing army. At times of war, he would inform all the villages, and every soldier, able man would come and gather, and they would go to war together for what? For cattle. Kauri Khan, Saugli Khan rule, and then they would win the war. They would bring back the cattle back home, and then someone in Nijon job Hakurina, Nijon la posted there. War time they got Jamagri. So I hope that the clarification is good enough. So he led the tribes in warfare. He protected the people and cattle whenever there's an emergency. He maintained order. He led important rituals, received gifts and tributes from people. Very obvious. He represented the tribe in relations with other tribes. Okay, so that was Rajan. Now, in the early Vedic period, the Rajan tuita type thagishe. It's a very important point. Ekta tuita posila Rajan thagishe. Alak to tosta 10-15 villages la Rajan thagishe. So taijon la powers and functions to alak to hubo. All we know is that the election of the Rajan was influenced by the samiti and the sabha, and then it was not hereditary. And then the Rajan, during war, he would lead the villages, and he also protected the people in cattle. I think these points are good enough to understand the term Rajan. Okay. Now we talk about Sabha, right? Sabha and Samiti. We will dig deeper. Sabha means the body of elders. The picture that I've shown you, this is the pictorial representation of the Sabha during the early Vedic period. It was a group of village elders who would gather and who would discuss on the election of the king, and then also discuss important matters and make decisions for the village. Group of elders, okay, with vast knowledge and experience, and people who hold great respect in the society. It mainly composed of Brahmans and elites. Why Brahmans? They knew the Vedas, they knew the rules and regulations. And why elites? Again, powerful people. Okay? So the speaker of the Sabha was called Sabhapati. Very easy to remember. Sabha, there was Sabha, body of elders, and then the speaker of the Sabha was Sabhabati. The members were called Sabya. Very easy to remember. It functioned as an advisory council. Okay, it would aid and advise the king, just in the same way the council of ministers aid and advise the president of India. We talked about that in Indian polity. So it functioned as an advisory council. Okay, Sabha is an advisory council consisting of a group of village elders, and the speaker was Sabha Sapadi. The members were called Sabha. Okay, very easy to understand. Now Samiti. Okay, look at Samiti. A lot of people. Okay, almost everyone in the village was a member of the Samiti. Samiti means folk assembly. Okay, folk assembly. Anyone who was able enough to take decisions, to make decisions, they were part of the folk assembly. Ini postide choragan gimana azu ulagina ini yedi thakala able manugan olop dangor hoi jagan na specific age limit eko thake nai, specific criteria eko thaka nai. The village people, okay, that influenced the election of the king, that influenced the political dynamics of the villages, they were all members of the Samiti. It was so which is why I mentioned folk assembly. The members were called Visha. The members of the Samiti were called Visha. It represented a broader body than the Sabha, obviously. And one of its important functions was the election of the king. Okay, there are evidence suggesting the election of the king by the Samiti. So that's one of the important functions, and yeah, that's it. Now we have the other Vedic assemblies. We talked about Sabha, we talked about Samiti, and then let's talk about Vitada and Gana. Okay, these were also another, just in the same way, positively group ekta duita na thake ro charta pasta thake na. So udunishna alongside the Sabha and the Samiti, they also had Vitada. Okay, Vitada. So in that Vitada, men and women participated. Men and women were all were members of the Vitada, and the Vitada usually settled disputes. Okay, between families, between individuals, they settled disputes. And also the Vitada, the gathering of Vitada was also a place for performing sacrifices. Okay, there are evidence suggesting that the gathering of Vitada was also a place for performing sacrifices. So Vitada is an important early Vedic assembly. It was associated with religious sacrifices, military and social activities. Okay, so the term is very vast, right? The term is very vast. Ekta clarity na payo Vitada la. Vitada is exactly the same. Multi-purpose la body ekta thakishe. Multi-purpose la body thakishe consisted of men and women, a very strong group in a village. But tala duties to ekta ekla thakana hai, multiple duties. Ki situation awa dade jai. Okay, so it is considered one of the oldest tribal assemblies mentioned in the Rig Veda. Okay, it could have a role in distribution of food resources. See, distribution of food resources is also mentioned in the Rig Veda. It's also mentioned in the Rig Veda, distribution of food resources. Kalohan, Pakuro, Pustidena, all these were handled by the Vitada. Okay, so which means Vitada is the second most important or the second most influential body in the village. It is second only to the Sabha. Sabha means a body of village elders. Udon the beshi strong one because it consisted of the Brahmins and the elites. Then the Vitada. Okay, Vitada means सबसे powerful can be no, but ekta influential group ekta thakishe Vitada na. And we talk about Samiti. Samiti means almost sob asilo posila. But Vitada the responsibilities that they handle, it was immense. Okay, almost all the responsibilities of the village were handled by the Vitada. And we have the Gana, which is a collective or corporate tribal organization. It is a group or corporate body of people. It had political, social, and military functions. Okay, it is associated with collective decision making. It could function as a tribal political organization. It represents the collective character of the early Vedic tribal society. So Gana, it wasn't exactly permanent in nature. Whenever the need arose, let's say there's a war. Okay, there's a war and they need to make a collective decision. So a Gana was summoned, right? A Gana was planned, and then everyone would gather in that Ghana, and they would have discussions. Okay, so more serious. Ghana is more serious, and then Vitada is more practical. Vitada the everyday life, this and that, but Ghana it was situational. Okay, situational. Every time there's an important matter to be discussed, a Ghana was conducted, a Ghana was held. Is that clear? So, early Vedic polity, that's a complete structure. So we have the Kula, which is what? What is Kula? Do you guys remember? Basic family unit, right? And then we have the Grama, which is a village, and then the Jana, okay? And in the Jana, we have the Sabha and the Samiti, and also Vitada and Kana, okay? So Sabha, body of elders in a village, Samiti, folk assembly, election of king, Vitada, disputes, redistribution of food resources and sacrifices, and Ghana, political or social organization that dealt with the more serious stuff, okay? And this everyday stuff, and this election, and this advisory always advises the king, body of elders. Is that clear? So this is the entire Vedic polity, the complete structure of the Vedic polity. Now let's talk about their economy. Okay, let's talk about their economy. The first is cattle. Cattle was the main measure of wealth. Okay, remember we still haven't come up with the money. Only barter system existed with the time to be. Eventually we will come up with punch mark coins. Okay, punch mark coin. Iowa 600 BC by the end of the later Vedic period. But now Samani as a or to someone majide cattle subs important thagiche. It was a main measure of wealth. Very important. But then the priorities changed in the later Vedic period. Okay, people started prioritizing agriculture ahead of cattle. Now we have the Gavisti. It was a term. Okay, Gavisti means search for cows. The literal interpretation of Gavisti means search for cows. It was a term associated with war. Okay, if there's a war, they say Gavishti. Gavishti karne jabo. Na guru bisarle jabo. Hun to hunt cattle. Okay, that was the purpose of the war. So Gavishti means guru bisaru wale jabo. So the term war means Gavishti in the early Vedic period. A very important term. Do not forget it. And agriculture was present, but less dominant. Another very important distinction about early Vedic economy, agriculture was present but it was less dominant. It was only in the later Vedic period that they started prioritizing agriculture. Okay, and trade, barter system, exchange of one good with another. Nishka, that question was asked when I gave my NSSP, I think last year. Nishka, coin, gold coin. The answer was gold coin. Okay. So Nishka was gold used in larger transactions in later years. Towards the end of the early Vedic economy, Nishka was also introduced, which means gold. Nishka simply means gold. Okay, and we will come across Nishka again. Okay, in the later slides. So please remember. So next we have women in early Vedic society. Now I've explained to you that women enjoyed a respectable position in the early Vedic society. They also got opportunities for spiritual and intellectual development. They participated in Sabha and Samiti. What was the role of Samiti? Mainly the election of the king, the Rajan. And even women had a role during the early Vedic period, which was taken away, stripped away from them in the later Vedic period. They also had opportunities for spiritual and intellectual development, which is also stripped away from them in the later Vedic period. Okay, so women poets are mentioned in Vedic literature, early Vedic literature. Women poets are mentioned. We have Abala, Vishwavara, Kosa, Lobamutra. These are the 4 names that you must memorize. Okay, these are 4 important poets, female poets of the early Vedic age. Okay, so as you can see, the women were intellectuals. They were able to influence not only men but also the entire political structure of the village as well, and they were educated, well versed. Okay, they had opportunities for spiritual and intellectual development. So the position of women was quite good in the early Vedic period was quite good. In fact, it was a very good position, okay, comparatively speaking. Now we will look at the Vedic literature. Okay, Vedic literature. So if you look at the Vedic literature, this is the entire Vedic literature. Okay, you don't need to know anything else. You don't need to know anything else. Moilas up there. The Rig Veda, this Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, and Atharva Veda. These four are what we call Samhitas. Okay, these four are what we call Samhitas, the Bible of the Hindus. The Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, Atharva Veda. These are the four Vedas. We will discuss that in detail later on. Okay, in the next slide, I think. Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, Atharva Veda. These are Samhitas. Chants. I talked about the Vedas, the meaning of the Samhitas earlier, right? So we have rituals, we have chantings, we have singing, spells, charms. All these are Samhitas. Okay. Now we also have the Brahmanas, which explains the Vedas. The Brahmanas, they explain the Vedas, mainly explanation of mantras and rituals, which means explanation of the Vedas. Okay, they explain. For example, the Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, and Atharva Veda. Let's talk about Yajurveda. The Yajurveda will talk about rituals. Okay, for every kind of for marriage, this ritual should be conducted. For a Brahmana to gain eminence, this ritual should be conducted, and this and that. Now, Brahmana will explain how to conduct this ritual, which leaves to use, which wood to use to burn the fire, and which water from which river to use as holy water to sprinkle upon the person who is receiving the ritual. Okay, all this will be contained in the Brahmanas. And then we have the Aranyakas, which is a forest treatise. Okay, it was written in the forest, and the Aranyakas, I will explain it later on. It comes within Brahmanas and Upanishads. So Aranyakas moved from the Brahmanas and the Vedas. Vedas and the Brahmanas, they were a little bit more serious, practical, okay, scientific. But when we talk about Aranyakas, it moved away from Brahmanas and the Vedas, and it became a little bit more philosophical. They started asking metaphysical questions. Okay, for example, there's this ritual, they will burn a fire, right? But they would say that fire outside equates to fire within. Okay, so when you're burning fire, you have to know that there's a fire burning inside you. Something philosophical. Okay, so this led to the foundation. This became the foundation of Upanishads, and Upanishads means philosophy. This forest treatise is one. Okay, this is Aranyakas. Upanishads meaning philosophy. So Aranyakas laid the foundation for the establishment of the Upanishads. So Upanishads are philosophical interpretations and philosophical discussions of the Hindus. Upanishads. Every philosophy, what is the purpose of this universe? What is the Atman? What is the Brahman? All this Brahman, the creator, Atman, the inner self, all these are contained in Upanishads. So we have the Bible, we have the Brahmanas, the explanation of the Bible, we have the Aryanyakas that moved away from the practical side of the Bible as well as the explanation of the Bible and moved towards philosophy. And this philosophy was crude, not too well filtered, not too perfect, which later on evolved into Upanishads, which was completely philosophical. Okay, that's the entire Vedic literature. And one very important point about Aranyakas, forest treatise. Okay, jungle de jaina buigna likhina pura la samana se coordinate jungle la samani ase. You will learn about that later. So I hope everything is clear, and we will go one by one. Okay, Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, and Atharva Veda. So these are the four Vedas. The Rig Veda, this is the most extensive and the most important. It will contain hymns. Okay, it will contain hymns. Rig Veda means hymns. Okay, so Samaveda verses arranged for singing or chanting. You can just write Samaveda meaning songs and chants. Okay, for your convenience in your examination, Samaveda songs and chants. And Yajurveda will contain the rituals and sacrifices. Okay, and then Atharva Veda will contain the different spells, charms, diseases, and protection. Atharva Veda. There's a lot of cure, antidote to diseases. Okay, there are lots of writings within the Atharva Veda that talks about how to heal from this disease, that disease, and all this will be contained in the Atharva Veda. It will contain the various spells that you can use to, chase away the demons, various charms that you can use for love, this, that, lots of things in the Atharva Veda. Okay, in fact, Atharva Veda. The other word for Atharva Veda would be magic. Magic. Okay, so I memorize it as magic and technical formulae. So another term for Atharva Veda would be magic. Okay, so Yajur Veda, sacrifices and rituals. Sama Veda, songs and chants. And Rig Veda, hymns, just like the Bible, the hymns. Okay, so I hope it's clear. All these 4 Vedas that from the Samhitas. Now, a special dive into Rig Veda, a very brief explanation. It is divided into 10 mandalas, okay? 10 mandalas. Divided into 10 mandalas. Mandalas could be books or chapters, okay? The term that I would use is chapters. It was divided into 10 chapters. Mandala, for mandala 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I don't know if it's necessary for you guys to memorize all the 10 mandalas, but you guys can research on these 10 mandalas because it's very interesting. First of all, it's a good read. I've read it and it was wonderful. So you can read it for your own sake or you can read it for the sake of the examination. But either way, diving into the mandalas is not too necessary. You just have to know that there are 10 mandalas. We were asked the same exact question last year. Okay, last year or last year, the Rig Veda is divided into how many mandalas? The answer was 10. You can check the PYQ of 2023 or 24 and you will find that answer. But they did not ask us the inside of the mandalas. Okay, so not too important to dive into the inside. So we just have to know 10 mandalas, 1028 hymns. That's it. It was a major source of understanding early Vedic society. Okay, it was in the Rig Veda that the prioritization of the cattle was mentioned, and a lot about the Vedic culture is understood through the Rig Veda. Now beyond the Vedas, so I talked about the Samhitas, which are Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, and Atharva Veda, and we talk about the Brahmanas, which explains the Vedas, and Aryanyagas for his treatise. Right, a little bit philosophical, which laid the foundation for Upanishads, which became completely philosophical. Now, if you look at it, Aranyakas, Brahmanas, I'm sure all of you have understood it by now. I will not repeat my explanation. Brahmana simply means explanation of mantras and sacrifice rule book. Okay, rule book. Aranyakas, Brahmanas could be considered a rule book. Aryanyakas, an intermediary layer. It was positioned between Samhitas and Brahmanas. Samhitas meaning the 4 Vedas and Brahmanas. Utula next the aire, utu pichide aye. And Upanishads la, Utula, it comes after Brahmanas and the Vedas, and then it comes before the Upanishads. Utula middle there. Okay, there's Aryanyakas in the middle, and then ahead of it, the Brahmanas and the Samhitas, and after Aryanyakas, Upanishads. Okay. So shift to philosophy. They move the focus away from the physical ritual execution towards meditation, breath control, and soul realization. So just imagine physical ritual execution. The Vedas will consider the Vedas will contain the ritual. The Brahmanas will tell us how to conduct the ritual, and then the Aryanyakas will tell us the meaning of the ritual. Why are we actually sacrificing? Why are we actually conducting ritual? All these philosophical questions are inside Aryanyakas. Okay, and then it gets much deeper in Upanishads. Now, Upanishads, they question everything. They question everything. What is the purpose of the wood burning, right? And then what is the purpose of this universe? Who is the creator of this universe? And they created a philosophy called Brahma. They say that Brahma is the creator, right? The Hindus say that Brahma is the creator. All these philosophical uh, discourses were conducted in this Upanishad. Okay, I hope the clarification is clear. Good enough? Okay, next we will move on to the early Vedic religion. Okay, the early Vedic religion. So, religion was mainly based on the worship of natural forces. By natural forces, what do we mean? Lightning, thunder, wind. God of thunder, God of lightning, God of wind is very similar to the Greek culture. Okay, the kings are the gods of Olympus in the Greek literature: Zeus, Ares, Poseidon, Hades, and so forth. And all these were creations based on the natural forces, even the Greek literature. So it's very similar to the Greek literature, meaning Indra was the most important god during the early Vedic period, god of rain, thunder, and war. And we also have Agni, the god of fire, and Varuna, the god of cosmic order and water. Okay, so we also have Surya. Oh, sorry, I forgot which is why. Yeah, only three is mentioned here. This is the slide that I should have deleted. Okay, we have this. Yes, I was wondering why there's no Surya. Now we have Indra, the god of rain, thunder, and war. God of rain, thunder, and war. We have Agni, the god of fire. We have Agni, the god of fire, sacrifice and messenger between human gods. Agni, fire. Okay, just memorize it this way. Indra, thunder, rain and thunder. Okay, Agni, fire. Varuna, cosmic order. The overall order of the universe was handled by Varuna. Okay, these were the three important gods of the Rig Vedic period, early Vedic period. So these are the major gods of the Rig Veda. And we also have additional Surya, which was the god of sun, Vayu, the god of wind. Okay, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the 5 important gods, and we also have another 3. Usas, meaning goddess of dawn. Okay, it symbolizes light, dawn, the oncoming of sunrise. It symbolizes light, renewal, and the beginning of a new day. Usas. Rudra, a fierce deity associated with storms, wild nature, and healing. So Rudra was followed mostly by peasants, okay, by farmers and so forth, because Rudra was associated with storm, with wild nature, and with healing. So they needed that in their agriculture, in their cattle, in the Duan, So, bishi manu kan do cattle kan own gra, our shepherds kan, maybe peasants kan, farmers kan, Rudra tan la isor thakide. Low class people mainly. And Soma, a sacred ritual drink and associated deity. Soma juice was offered in sacrifices associated with inspiration, vitality, and immortality. So during sacrifices, okay, during rituals, a Soma juice was given to the person. Soma, mudu aze. Let's say, I think it was more kind of like a rice beer, okay. So ritual thakibo, rice beer khelabo, the rice beer thaga kheladamde, we should invoke the blessing of Soma, because he is the god of that tree. Okay, and only if we are able to invoke the blessing of Soma, the rice beer, the Soma, will have its effect on us in a positive way. Maybe we would be healed, we would receive wealth, prosperity, and so forth. We never know. Okay, so that's Soma. Now I hope all the gods are clear. If you were a Hindu, which god would you prefer? God of rain, thunder, I don't think you need that. God of fire. Varuna is a good god, right? I think he seems powerful. I would choose Varuna. Now Yashna, okay. Yashna is another very important term during the early Vedic period. It means sacrifice. Yashna means sacrifice. In Vedic religion, they would sacrifice animals, mainly, So the people will give their offerings, and there will be a sacred fire called Agni, which will be sacrificed for the gods. That's the purpose of Yashna. Okay. The sacrifices the people for. I think it's also mentioned in the book of Genesis as well, about sacrifices, and we also know the story of Abraham, who tried sacrificing Isaac. Even our Christian God demanded sacrifices, human sacrifices as well as animal sacrifices, right? The Cain and Abel, the story of Cain and Abel, is also a story of sacrifice. So even the Vedic religion had sacrifice, which was Yashna. Okay, so the people would come with offerings, which will be sacrificed in front of the altar, and then they would burn it. A sacred fire would be burned, and this meant invoking the blessing of the god that they wish, that they look up to, that they worship. Okay. Now, early Vedic religion, the key features in the examination, nature worship is one very important point that you need to mention. Indra, Agni, Varun. These are the three kings that you cannot miss. And then sacrifices. Nature, sacrifices, and in the middle, Indra, Agni, Varun. These 5 explanations would fetch you good marks. Okay. And lastly, you can write about the non-existence of temples. So there were no temples during the early Vedic period. Everything was done through rituals and sacrifices. At any place, they did not give a specific place for rituals and sacrifices. There was no temple. Now, early Vedic economy, cattle rearing. This is a reiteration of what we studied earlier. Okay, cattle rearing, most important occupation. Agriculture was secondary; it was not primary. Trade, mainly barter system, and wealth measured largely through cattle. And we have Gavisti. Okay, we have Gavisti, which means search for cows. Gavisti Javo means war Javo. Guru Turule Javo. The wars were waged for cows. Okay. So this is it about. So the economic transformation before and after the Vedic period. Okay. Before and after the early Vedic period and the later Vedic period. So if we look at the early Vedic period, we have the cattle rearing, which later became secondary, and what became primary? Agriculture. Later Vedic period. We're going to switch to later Vedic period, so it's very important to understand that transition. Okay. So cattle rearing means they led a pastoral life. Okay, but eventually for the later Vedic period, they settled permanently, very permanently, and limited agriculture, but there was larger production of different fruit crops and the crowing towns, okay, which was not seen in the early Vedic period, began to be seen in the later Vedic period. So these are just basics of what we must know before we shift to later Vedic period. Okay, agriculture, permanent settlements, larger production, crowing towns. Okay, the shift to, when we talk about pastoralism, people stay where there are pastures. People stay where there's green grass. Okay, where the animals can be fed, this and that. So they were pastorals. Okay, but here they settled permanently in the later Vedic period, and the agriculture was limited, since again, what was the whole point of these grasslands? Not for them to consume these fruits and veggies, but for them to let the cows consume these grasses. So pastoralism, early Vedic period, later Vedic period, permanent settlements. Okay, so now next we move on to the map. So early Vedic period, I talked about them being within this region. You must understand these rivers. Okay, Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Beas, and Sutlej. These are 7 important rivers, and then we also have the Parushni, Ravi, the Saraswati, which is no longer in existence. It's only mentioned in the Rig Vedas, the river Saraswati. This is the most holy river, okay, of the Hindus. Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Beas, and Sutlej. The Chenab is mentioned twice. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and then we have the Indus River. All these rivers flow into the Arabian Sea, as you can see, right? These rivers, they flow into the Arabian Sea. This is the Arabian Sea. This is the Bay of Bengal. Now, when the Indo-Aryans first came to India, they settled in this region. I've mentioned that earlier, northwest part of India. Then they moved towards the Ganga plains, okay, or the Gangetic plains, and it covers Bihar, parts of Bihar, UP, and yeah, parts of Himachal Pradesh and so forth. Okay, so iniga IJC that, oh sorry, iniga IJC, I yet settle Gujishi. Now, what was the advantage of settling here in the Ganga plains? The plains are more fertile. Okay, very fertile. We have the alluvial soil. Alluvial soil is the most fertile soil that we have here in India. Okay, it is formed by sediments running down from the mountains and getting deposited on the lower plains, and upon which they plant their crops. So that's one advantage that they had when moving down to the Ganga plains. Okay, the soil was very fertile, perfect for agriculture. They started practicing agriculture. So now you have a visual imagery of what happened during the transition from the early Vedic to later Vedic period. The later Vedic period, people settled here, this part. Okay, remember that. Now, later Vedic period, expansion towards the Ganga plains. I've explained that just now. Agriculture again. The soil was very fertile, became the main occupation. Larger kingdoms emerged, and political power of the kings increased. Okay, which means Sabha and Samiti la influence iman thakana ito. It became more or less hereditary. The king became very powerful. He no longer had to rely on the Sabha and Samiti for his election. Okay, Varna system became more established. The fourfold Varna system: Brahmanas, Vaishyas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Shudras. Rituals became more elaborate. Okay, we will learn about that. So these are the basic features of the later Vedic period. Okay, later Vedic economy, agriculture. Back then we had cattle. Now we have agriculture. Okay, and these were the crops: barley and wheat. Itu tuida members kuledo good enough. Barley and wheat. Okay, barley and wheat. Same with the Harappa civilization, the early Vedic, later Vedic, barley and wheat. They eat a lot of barley and wheat. Now, animals, buffalo and oxen used for agriculture. Okay, buffalo and oxen used for agriculture. And crafts, they also had metal work, leather work, carpentry, and pottery. Now, metal work, iron was also known to them. And leather work, they also made various equipments using leather, carpentry, and pottery. And in trade, hereditary merchants were called vaniya. There was a class of merchants called vaniya, okay? And they were hereditary. So the bavala bacha wo, bachala bacha ho, it was hereditary. This class of merchants were called vaniya, V-A-N-I-Y-A, okay? This class of merchants were called vaniya. Now we also have the exchange system. We talked about Nishka, right? Do you remember Nishka earlier? Gold. That was asked last year or last year, okay? When did I give my... I only gave NSSP once, so that was in the year 2024. Yeah, 2024. That was the year that they asked us about the Nishka, which was gold coin. So it's a gold ornament or neck piece, okay? It's a, initially, but later it was used as a unit of value, unit of exchange. It was used as a unit. Initially, it was kind of like a necklace or a neck piece, okay? But later on, it was used as a unit of value. The rich people, they would give out nishka. Maybe it was a bracelet, maybe it was a necklace, we don't know, but it was an ornament, a gold ornament, which was exchanged from one rich man to another. Okay, so it became a medium of exchange. And we also have satamana. I think satamana, S-A-T-A-M-A-N-A, satamana, which was also a unit of value. It was just a unit of weight, okay? It's not a thing, okay? But it was generally associated with silver. Satamana means a unit of weight or value, and its form was silver, okay? Silver. So we have Nishka, gold, Satamana, silver, and then Krishnala, Krishnala, which was again another unit of weight. Okay, a very small unit of weight. It was a collection of red beans. Kolar janena, we call it kidney beans. Red beans is very similar to kidney beans, but except it's a little smaller and more rounded. Okay, so kind of like kolar. So the red beans thakise, the red beans color grow, and the red beans the ekta measurement la unit thake na, aru the la is the uchin grow. Gauri kiman ase? Tosta mutha red beans. In ana ekta measurement, it was a unit of measurement. Okay, so again, Nishka, Satamana, and Krishnala. Okay, these all three are units of value. Units of value. Okay. Now, later Vedic social changes. Early Vedic society, it was very simple. The family was very simple, relatively simple. Every class of people during the early Vedic period was based on their occupation. If you're a craftsman, you become a craftsman. If you're a soldier, you're a soldier. If you're a Rajan, you're a Rajan. If you're a member of the Sabha, a village elder, you're a village elder. Everything was occupation based. Very simple, okay? Occupation and not rigidly hereditary, and also women participated in assemblies. But in the later Vedic society, it was no longer occupational. It was, in some sense, occupational. Obviously, brahmanas, priests, and then we have the kshatriyas, the soldiers, we have the vaishyas, the traders and merchants, and we have the shudras, the lowest class of people, usually the peasants and so forth. It was based on occupation, but it became hereditary. Meaning, once you're a Shudra, you will always be a Shudra. Once you're a Brahmana, you will always be a Brahmana. So imagine by birth, you're disadvantaged the moment you're born. Okay, that was a Varna system during the later Vedic society, and women's participation in Sabha and Samiti declined. Okay, eventually declined. They were no longer allowed in assemblies, and Sabha and Samiti, and child marriage emerged. Okay, children as young as I think 9-10 years old were married off the men. It's insane, right? So that was a later Vedic society. Okay, now this is the justification that I've given for you guys: the early Vedic society and the later Vedic society. A very important bit. Let us read it together. Okay, let us go through it together. Social division existed. Okay, like I said, Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, and Vis, the common people, existed during the early Vedic period, but it was occupation based. However, the fourfold Varna system was not yet fully developed. Okay, the Brahmanas, the Kshatriyas, and the Vis were recognizable social groups during the early Vedic period, but in the later Vedic period, the four Varna scheme, Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudra, they became clearer towards the end of the Rig Vedic period and more firmly established in the later Vedic period. I hope the clarification is clear. Okay, some websites will say that the Varna system started in the early Vedic period, but all you need to know is that the later Vedic period was the period when the fourfold Varna system existed. Okay. Now we have the early Vedic period and the later Vedic period. Another point of comparison: polity here, tribal, Rajan, Sabha, Samiti. The polity of the early Vedic period, it was by and large tribal. It was ruled by a Rajan, and we also had the Sabha and Samiti, which influenced the election of the Rajan. So the influence of the power of the Sabha and Samiti was immense during the early Vedic period. But let's go to the later Vedic period. The polity, larger kingdoms. Now the king no longer was elected, okay, by the Samiti. It was hereditary. It was passed down from one generation to another generation. The king's son would become the next king, the next king, the next king, and so forth. Okay, so assemblies declined, Sabha and Samiti. And we look at economy. Cattle was prioritized, whereas in the later Vedic period, agriculture became important. Society, it was relatively egalitarian. I've mentioned that earlier. Less rigid social divisions, whereas the society became more rigid with the fourfold Varna system. Okay, if you touch a Shudra, you are considered unclean for this number of days, that number of days, and so forth. Okay, Religion, Indra, Agni, Varun was very important, but in the later Vedic period, we have more elaborate yajnas. We have growing importance of Rudra and Shiva. Okay. Now we will talk about the rise of large kingdoms during the later Vedic period. Early Vedic period, very simple, tribal groups, and we had Jana. Early Vedic period, we had tribal groups, and then we had Jana. But in the later Vedic period, there was territorial expansion, and it formed large kingdoms. Okay, and by the end of the later Vedic period, around 600 BC, we saw the rise of Mahajanapatas. Towards the end of the later Vedic period, the first official large kingdom, okay, emerged. The 16 Mahajanapatas. By the end of the 6th century BC, power established with the 16 Mahajanapatas. I will show you the map as well. It's insane. Now, several tribes, tribal groups, and later kingdoms are mentioned in later Vedic literature. Okay, kingdoms are mentioned in later Vedic literature, not early Vedic. Later Vedic literature. Territories became more important than their allegiance towards their tribe or clan. Okay, political units became larger, much larger. Kings became more powerful. Okay. Now this is a geographical division. Dakshinapad south, Madhya Desa central, Aryavata north. Okay, these are the terms that they use. Madhya Desa, Dakshinapad. You will come across these three terms very often. I will explain in detail when the time comes. Now it's not too important. Jana, territory, kingdom. Okay, there was initially there was just Jana. It was just Jana, and later on the territory expanded and formed into kingdoms. Now the rise of the king. Okay. In the early Vedic period, we had the Raja, and it became hereditary in the later Vedic period, which led to a stronger monarchy. And to your right, the position of the chief of Jana became hereditary. The idea of divine nature of kingship appears in later Vedic. What is the divine theory? I'm sure political science student would know the divine theory, right? Which means he is anointed by God to be the king. Okay, he has the blessing of the God. He has the blessing, the divine blessing of the God to be the king. So this theory appears in the later Vedic literature. So who can go against God, right? The kings would use the names of gods, saying that, I am the sole representative of our God, because I was anointed by him, and I have the divine blessing of the God, and so the people cannot go against the king. So divine kingship appears in the later Vedic literature. Okay, popular assemblies gradually lost importance. Now the king and his officials. In the later Vedic period, the king had two important associates. Okay, one, Purohita, known as the priest, and next is Senani, the military commander. These two, later Vedic period, if they ask you anything at all from the later Vedic period with regards to king and his officials, Purohita and Senani are the two terms that you need to memorize. The rest, spacious there. There's a lot of terms, but Purohita aro Senani do naporubi, morom naporubi. Basic terms and bisias you'll find it on the internet in various books. But Purohita was the priest, and Senani was the military commander. Okay, Purohita advised the king on religious matters, and Senani was the head of the military. So the king plus Purohita plus Senani, they form the core of later Vedic political authority. Now just imagine how the three of them coordinated. Let's take the example of a social situation. Okay, a group of people goes against the king. The Purohita would come out and say that the king is chosen. The king was chosen by God. Why are you guys going against the king? And if they don't listen, the military commander would go and arrest them, kill them, whatsoever. So Udut Tindala coordination, it was necessary and it existed. Okay. So what happened to Sabha and Samiti? they decline. I've already explained that, so I'll skip that. So from Jana, the people of the tribe, Jana means tribe. Okay, from tribe, there was territorial expansion, and Kimon territory Stangor it became a territory, Rashtra, meaning territory. Okay, the term Rashtra indicated land or territory, and it appears in the later Vedic literature. So Jana turned into Rashtra. Okay, Rashtra, very large territory. Now we have the Varna system. The Varna system was introduced during the later Vedic period. Okay, Varna system is the four stages of life that every man must go through, not woman. Okay, every man must go through. Udo time dedo maiki gando ki debi practice korle na dedo na. So even the Varna system. Sorry. Not the Varnashrama system is in the next following slides. The Varna system, the Brahmanas, the priests, the Kshatriyas, warriors, Vaishyas, productive groups, cultivators or traders. Okay, businessmen koi dibi Vaishyas to na, trade and commerce, Vaishyas, trade and commerce. Shudra, lower social category, the lowest. Okay, and later on we also come with another class called CHN Jantelas, lower than Shudras. Okay. But much later, not necessary now. We now have the Brahmana, the Kshatriya, the Vaishya, and the Shudra. Forgive me for the spelling, the disorder arrangement of the spelling. Kshatriya, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. Okay, so these are the four divisions, social divisions during the later Vedic period. Yeah, the four ashramas. Okay, the four stages of life of a man during the Vedic age, the four ashramas. Now, the first stage is brahmacharya. Okay, if you're a brahmacharya, it means that you are a student. You are trying to learn the Vedas. You are trying to learn the Upanishads. You are trying to learn the Aryanyakas. The teacher will teach you, and you need to be with the teacher for many years until you are mature enough to marry. Okay, once you're mature enough to marry, you will move on to the next stage of life, which is grihastha or grihashta. So once you are in that grihastha state, you will spend a good life with your wife, you will bear children, you will lead a good householder life. Okay, you will enjoy life with your wife, go to honeymoon trip, anywhere, okay, with your wife. You enjoy, have fun. But then, after you have fun, you become a vanaprastha. Vanaprastha means it is a hermit stage, okay, in which you need to go to the forest and meditate and fast. Okay, and after vanaprastha, once you're very much ready, once your body is ready, you become a sannyasa. You give up everything about life and you become a sannyasa, a renounced life. You renounce everything, all the material world, you renounce it, and then you become a sannyasa, or we call it sannyasi. Okay, so once you become a sannyasa, you will abandon your children, you will abandon your wife, you will abandon everything, and you will go from one place to another, sleep wherever you can sleep, give up everything, renounce life altogether. Okay, so these are the four stages of life: the brahmacharya, student life; grihastha, family life; vanaprastha, a life of meditation, a hermit life; and then sannyasa, a renounced life. These are the four stages. Okay, the four ashramas was also introduced during that period. Now, later Vedic religion. Rudra, Shiva, and Pashupati became more revered. I have explained that, so I will skip that. Now, important yajnas of the later Vedic period. Important sacrifices of the later Vedic period. These are the three important sacrifices of the later Vedic period. Okay, it's very important. It's very important. We have the Ashwamedha, we have the Vajapaya, we have the Rajasuya. Ashwamedha means horse sacrifice. Vajapaya means chariot race, and Rajasuya means royal consecration. Now let me explain Ashwamedha, horse sacrifice. Okay, the king, if he wants to conquer another territory, he would let a horse free for a year, and whichever kingdom the horse touches, that he will conquer. Okay, and if any king of that territory wishes to go against the king who sent the horse needs to be killed by them. The horse will be guarded by a group of guards, and they'll need to kill the guards, and they'll need to kill the horse. And now should we collect battle huwa. But if they let the horse pass, it means that they accepted the sovereignty of the king. Okay, that's how territories were conquered using Ashwamedha. So Ashwamedha, the horse would be allowed to roam around different territories everywhere, and then the king, whichever land is touched by Ashwamedha, it means that God has instructed him to go and conquer those lands. If the Ashwamedha sacrifice was done, the people found their belief in God is very strong, right? So they're not fighting for the king, they're fighting for God. Because it is God's purpose to conquer those territories. And that's the tool used by the kings, okay, to appease the people. Now, once the horse comes back, he's claimed, sapaguride, aro jagina dage sacrifice to the gods. Inaugurate. So that's horse sacrifice, okay, for territorial expansion. And we also have the Vajabaya, which is the chariot race. It is associated with the king. So the king is always meant to win the race. Okay, the king is always everything is planned for the king to win the race. That race, though, king always wins. He's treated like king Nachirado. It's not like he's competing with other people and then the king wins and he's so impressive. No, he is meant to win the race. And what happens after the race? Next slide, the power. And then the Raja Saya would be royal consecration as a holy water kam phelawa, rituals kam growa, and then king the ekta alag level to uthai diwa na inyala ase. So ceremony associated with kingship, associated with the king, performed to demonstrate imperial sovereignty. Okay, so we look at the difference. See, the primary goal, the rank conferred. Let's talk about the rank conferred. Okay, Vajabaya, Ashwamedha, and Rajasuya. Once you complete the Vajabaya, the race, okay, once you complete the chariot race, you are given the title of Samraj, the universal ruler. That's the title. It's a title power like karne. If you're not the Samraj, the people won't listen to you. So the race is conducted, and after that, rituals happen, and he is conferred the title of Samraj, emperor or universal ruler. And next we have the Rajasuya. Okay, what is Rajasuya? Royal consecration. Okay, usually a ritual is conducted, and lastly holy water from a holy river is brought, and then a priest will sprinkle the holy water on the head of the king, and that's Rajasuya. Okay, so what Rajasuya does is it will give him the title of Raja, the sovereign ruler. So which means Vajabaya is much more eminent, I think, than Rajasuya. Okay, so Ashwamedha do unchallenged Chakrawardin, unchallenged overlord, right? Force Lugina Chailido, he will be known as the Chakrawardin, the lord that wasn't challenged, the unchallenged overlord, the lord that conquered all the other territories. So these were the titles that they gained from these three yashna sacrifices. Okay, and the rest you can go through it once you guys go home.